If you do this through free contract with other free people in a place that it cannot inflate, you can live and prosper in this hostile environment, and you could care less about what all this other stuff is going on out there. It's a peaceful, stress-free way of life.
Now that we know what's going on in the economy and what Trump's been up to, I think it's time that we all get a thinking lesson. And so I'm extremely honored. I get to do something that I'm just so proud and happy to do. And that's an opportunity to introduce someone who's near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure most of you in this room, someone who I believe is changing lives, has been doing it for a long, long time, probably longer than I've been alive. And by the virtue of this book coming into my life, and I'm sure your lives here in this room today, we have this incredible ability to not only share in camaraderie and be together in the room, but to have a powerful method to impact people in just such a way that it's almost unimaginable just how much we can do to help others. And so please put your hands together in welcoming our Nelson Nash.
I have the feeling that a lot of you are beginning to catch on to the idea that this is not about selling life insurance. This is about the banking function in life. The banking function is in the hands of the wrong people. It should be at the you and me level totally. You've been fooled by what goes on out there in the world because of how people think. I could care less what the Federal Reserve is doing. They don't enter into my life. The banking function should be at the you and me level totally through free contract with other free people. Now that is something called life insurance. It's a contractual relationship in a place that cannot inflate the money supply. Now, you know I'm almost 87 years old. I had 2 years of active duty with the Air Force because of being an ROTC student while I was in college. Do y'all know what a second lieutenant's base pay was in 1953? $213.75 every month, whether you needed it or not. $75 housing allowance, $42 food allowance. Do y'all know we got along very well compared with everybody else at that time? Well, what do we have today? Are you aware of the numbers out there? I'm not going to tell you. Who caused this? Bankers. The credibility given to the idea of a central bank. Well, how much longer can you put up with that nonsense? You can secede from it in this hostile financial environment. But by golly, you got to quit thinking the way you think. And so, I wrote this book, Becoming Your Own Banker, because of all this sort of stuff. In order to understand why I wrote the book, you got to understand who I am. And so you have a handout there that's several pages long. And the first item will be something that I wrote. When I named this idea infinite, I meant it. You cannot put a definition on infinite. The more you see, the more you see you didn't see. Well, in my book, I've had any number of people always saying, I've read your book 50 times now, and I didn't know that was in there. That ought to give you a clue. All right, now, this separate handout that I've been passed out to you, please read that at least once every month for the rest of this year. Now, maybe it'll become habitual and that you'll keep doing it as time goes by, and it sinks into your psyche as to the truth of what we're talking about. I'd like for you to know what went through my mind over these 87 years that have caused me to write Becoming Your Own Banker and Warehouse of Wealth. First of all, the first item in there is my personal list of undeniable truths. This is what has developed over a lifetime of Bible study. This is the foundation of all that I am or that I hope to be. It all started when I became a Christian at age 9. This sort of thing does not appear immediately. It's an ongoing process for every last one of us. We are all a process in motion, I guess, over a period of time. The Bible is the best Austrian economics book in existence. It's bottom-up thinking. Now, you've heard my relationship with Leonard E. Reed. I got acquainted with FEE 61 years ago, but you know, it was in 66 that I finally got to meet the man. He was my personal friend as well as mentor. There are 100 charter members of the Leonard E. Reed Society, yours truly, and 99 others. What a privilege to have the opportunity to just call that man at most any time and talk. Now, you do know that you can go to fee.org and everything that man has ever written is there, and you can download it, and it doesn't cost you a dime. I suggest that you consider just going to any one of his books. Each chapter will take you about 15 to 20 minutes max to read. And it doesn't matter which book or whatever, because their sermonettes is what they really are. Now, the Bible is the best clinical psychology book that exists. The Sermon on the Mount. You know, when you buy an automobile, you get a manufacturer's handbook, don't you? Well, the Sermon on the Mount is the manufacturer's handbook for you. The Bible is the story of man's relationship to his Maker. It's not about science, world history, climatology, plant or animal life, geology, or any other study which mankind indulges. In Genesis 1:26, then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that we may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the livestock and all the wild animals and all the creatures that move above the ground." Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord and everything is the Lord's and everything in the world, and all who live in it. Psalm 100. Know that the Lord is God. It is He who has made us, not we ourselves. We're His people. We're the sheep of His pastures. There's no way that this world that we know just happened. The Bible is the only reasonable explanation of why we're here. Now, God made us for fellowship with Him. It's impossible to have fellowship with a puppet, good Lord. So He had to give us free will. Giving us free will was the ability to reject Him. Well, what is our nature then, huh? Reject Him. That's what's going on out there, is rejection of who God is. When we reject Him, we're separated from Him. He did not reject us. We rejected Him. Mankind has one eternal problem. He wants to be God. To witness the ultimate manifestation of this malady, just watch what he tries to do with government. Sin is anything that we do that separates you and me from God. See, this is my frustration with Christians. We're all against sin. Give me evidence of sin, and they always come up with something nebulous or something that they don't do or something like that. But anything that you do that separates you from God is sin. It's that simple. Matthew 27:46. About 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" At that moment, he was separated from the Father. He became sin. It's the only time. Separation from God is the definition of sin. Well, all right, extrapolate that into your own lives and see what's going on. Be honest. Romans 6:23, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord." Sin killed Jesus Christ. not the beatings and extreme physical abuse that is usually depicted or alluded to before his death. But yet, you watch what happens when Easter comes around here in a couple of months. All the concentration is on the abuse that he got. That is not what killed him. What did him in was separation from the Father. That price has to be paid out there. He paid that price. 2 Corinthians 5:12, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Sin has a price, it must be paid. Jesus ransomed us as believers. There's a fundamental element of dependence in the act of worship. Have you ever noticed that? Man will worship that on which he is dependent. You will worship what you are dependent upon. My personal observation of Christians today is that they say they worship God, but suggest that you terminate one of their favorite government programs and they cannot conceive of life without it. Am I saying the truth? We are here on this earth for such a short period of time. In just 5 weeks, I'll be 87. That's just a blink of the eye in comparison with eternity. We're not here very long. This earthly experience is nothing more than a training camp to fit us for the eternal fellowship with our Maker. Man has glimpses of truth and light from time to time, but he finds it so easy and attractive to lapse into the ways of the world. John 1:10, he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He didn't meet their specifications. They were measuring him by their own understandings. John 4:24, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. All right, now you realize that Satan's also a spirit? How long has Satan been around? Day one. He is alive and well today. And it's my observation that most Christians don't recognize him. You got to realize what evil looks like. It's out there. And what's going on out there in the financial world, there's so much of it that is patently evil. What are his behavior characteristics? Satan is a wily creature. He always makes his ideas and actions look attractive initially. Basically, he is convincing people that we really don't need God. Man can do very well without him. All we have to do is form a coercive organization, government, put the right people in charge, and do what they say. That course of action is nothing more than man trying to play God in the pagan sense of the word. Unfortunately, most folks don't recognize this truth. Exodus 34:14. Do not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Now that is the reason that all government programs are destined to fall. God won't put up with such nonsense because they're all manifestations of mankind attempting to play God. But what I've observed out there is people can't get that through their heads. For instance, there's all this Cold War stuff that we had back there for quite some time, and you can lay that to the hands of the Dulles brothers and such, that communism is going to take over. Well, Mises pointed out there's no way that communism can work. It's destined to fall. And so rather than spending all that money on preventing communism from taking over, all I had to do was just take a little bit of that and buy Adirondack chairs for everybody in the United States and get them a cooler, drink coolers there and sit and watch communism fall apart. What happened to the Soviet Union after 70 years? Good Lord. It can't work. what is going on out there is to say, oh, it'll work if we get the right people running the show. And just to make sure we got the right people, it ought to be me. Now, every once in a while, you run into some very, very good stuff out there. Now, one of the people that I just talk on the phone with from time to time is Ricky Hurd down in Nacogdoches, Texas. That dang guy can think. And I was pointing out that when I wrote the book, Warehouse of Wealth, the 10th chapter is all about, it's from the Old Testament, how detrimental it is to you if you ever take a government handout of any kind. It will screw your mind up and you can't think straight and you will become a prisoner. And so it's entitled Out of Egypt and On to Babylon. But as the years went by, I saw that I had not done justice to the story. I should have extrapolated it to backward and forward there and bring it up to date to get the complete picture of what's going on. Well, Ricky sent me a piece written by Paul Rosenberg called Fish Are the Last to Notice the Water. I knew about this a long time before. It's not that this article presented this to me, but the most complete story, the complete explanation of this was by what Rosenberg put out here. Since I ran into this phrase in physics lecture of all places, and I knew it would be the title of my next article. And this is generally a true statement. Those who are immersed in something, who have always been immersed in it, are the last to see what it really is. But now it should be obvious to the people of the West that they are being held in a primitive bondage. And fortunately, more eyes are opening to this than ever before. But still, most people are so used to this particular water, end quote, and have so long acclimated themselves to it that they haven't recognized it. There's nothing inherently wrong with most of these people. They just haven't stepped back far enough to see the obvious, so let's do that. The long view. A single model of human life has dominated the West for thousands of years. I can summarize it by saying that this rulership model began to form about 5400 BC, dominated Mesopotamia by about 4000, took hold in Egypt around 3000 BC, and spread over the rest of the world from there. So it's dominated for some 5,000 to 6,000 years, depending on which date you prefer. The model is so common that it's hard to make out. And here it's parts. A small minority of men had a monopoly on making rules everyone else has to live by. The minority enforces these rules on everybody else. The minority extracts regular payments from everyone else. This is said to be necessary for protection and justice. The minority fails to provide justice on a daily basis and very often sends the children of the majority to fight in battles to the death. A minority-aligned intellectual class assures the majority that this is the best that can be had and that it has been sanctified by some higher power, gods, ancestors, traditions, reason, experience, progress, and whatever. Some years ago, I was reading a piece in the Freeman that this phenomenon that was being described here, that kings out there do not have absolute authority, and when they got to the line where they knew they couldn't step across, they always appealed to a higher authority. God told me to do this and so. You've never seen that, have you, huh? No one is permitted to escape this model. Those who try are punished as traitors and heretics. This is the primary model for human organization and has been for some 5,000 years. And aside from arguing over details, or fury over the audacity to say it, there's no real challenge to this statement. Moreover, this model has been an abject failure, a demonstrable failure. Wars have continued throughout the entire region. reign. Justice has been never achieved and generally came closest in places away from power centers. Human happiness has not noticeably increased. Even when science is broken out, it has been recaptured and forced to serve the model, the internet, for example. On top of that, this model has to be maintained by force. As noted above, straying from it is harshly punished. If this system was truly superior, force wouldn't be required. After all, we don't have to be forced to buy houses or cars. So by any number of measurable standards, this model fails and fails very, very badly. The best defense one can make of it is that something else could be worse. But since we're not permitted to test that assertion, the word bondage is a perfect fitting. At bare minimum, we can say this: any system with no major upgrade in 5,000 years must be considered hopelessly obsolete, moribund, and degenerate. This is where we stand today. And it's crucial that we help our fellows to see it. How do you make them see it? First of all, you cannot make people see. Somebody said, well, what we need is a required course in freedom. Well, interesting, huh? And truthfully, they generally see it quite well on their own. What they lack is the inner strength to acknowledge what they see. It is not intellectual strength that most people lack. It is emotional strength. And so you have to be slow and gentle if you want success. Rigorous intellectual arguments are not enough, and in many cases, they're counterproductive. In the end, the way to help your friends and neighbors is downright biblical. Plant seeds, wait for them to germinate, water them, show kindness, love them, shine light on their path. It doesn't matter if this sounds hokey to you or if you'd rather engage in brilliant arguments. This is what works. So decide what you really want for your friends and neighbors to see, or for you to, quote, win, end quote. Fish need faith to imagine a dry shore, and they're not going to get it from intellectual badgering. That is the most profound 2 pages that I've run into probably in my life. Now, the third is rather lengthy, and that's all about a great Austrian economist, Jesus Huerta de Soto, in Madrid, Spain. I bought his book when it first came out. He came to Auburn, Alabama, to the Mises Institute back in 1997, and somehow or another I missed it. I never have figured out how that happened. But as you read the article that he wrote here, this guy and I, our brains are duplicates of one another. First of all, he's Austrian. First of all, he's Christian. I'm sorry. He's Austrian. His family is from life insurance. And so he sees something there that most Austrians do not see. My Austrian friends do a great job of describing the problem out there, but they do not furnish a solution other than this top-down nonsense. Top-down nonsense will not work. Bottom-up does. Again, the Bible proves that conclusively. All the Old Testament is top-down thinking. When Jesus Christ appears on the scene, it's bottom-up thinking. There's no evidence that when Jesus Christ was going to start his mission out there, he knew he had a job to do, that he says to himself, you know, what I really need to do is go get involved with these Pharisees and Sadducees and get me a PhD under Gamaliel like Paul did. Absurd. It won't work. That's just MOS, more of the same. All right, now consider this. There's most of the New Testament is written by Paul. His teachings that he had got the living daylight slapped out of him on the way to Damascus. And he spent over 10 years in introspection to get his head screwed on right. After he finally got it screwed on right and was out there teaching what he had learned, he says to one group that I was the Pharisee of the Pharisees. I studied under Gamaliel. There was no one more into that top-down thinking than me. And now that I have been changed, I count all that stuff that I learned as dung, or in today's vernacular, it would be BS. Now, I don't have time to go into DeSoto that much, but what a fantastic experience it was for me to read this guy, and to also, I've extracted some items from an interview that he had at the Mises Institute. This is the only place that this has ever been published that I know of. I did not know that Lord Maynard Keynes was the head of a mutual life insurance company in England. Did you know that? Well, who is it that has the entire intellectual world totally captured out there except Keynes, huh? That's what's taught in your college. That's where you spend lots of money to send your kids to have their brains fried with thoughts, with Keynesian thinking. Keynes was the head of a life insurance company. Well, DeSoto points out is that not only did Keynes mess up the economic world totally, he also mixed up a life insurance company. His kind of thinking, he took the assets of the life insurance company and revalued them at market value rather than historical value. That enabled him to pay big dividends, and that looked real good for a while. But then what happened? The reality set in and almost wrecked the company totally. Now, doesn't that sound exactly like variable life? That was the genesis of it all right there. But what do we have going on out there today? Life insurance companies, of all things, are making these perverted things, involved in things that should never have happened. And they're backing government programs and so forth. Well, that's absurd. Look, I've pointed it out time and time again. When government creates a problem, parenthesis, onerous taxation, and then turns around and grants you an exception to the problem they created, parenthesis, in a tax-qualified plan, aren't you just a little bit suspicious you're being manipulated? But yet what is being put out there by financial people everywhere? You must maximize your 401k. Well, that's the easiest money they can come steal. And you see the stuff that Bob pointed out a while ago. Look, these are evil people. They will steal that kind of money. History proves that point conclusively. I was trying to point this out at a seminar in Pocatello, Idaho, a few years ago, and I pointed out that years ago, Brazil went out in the boonies and created a new city in the jungle. It's called Brasilia. Where did they get the money to do it? They confiscated the reserves on all the pension plans. Well, then I pointed out that Argentina did the same thing. Well, God provides. Lo and behold, in the audience there was a young man who grew up in Buenos Aires, and he spoke up and says, yes, every 5 years, the fund builds up. Gotcha. Fund builds up. Gotcha. And you just sit there and take it. So one of these days, does Paul Rosenberg's article make sense to you now? Okay, so it's this sort of thing that caused me to see that the world has got things totally backward. And that the problem out there that we see is the handling of the money supply is by people that are evil. Call them what they really are. Well, don't play their game. Secede from them. Contract with other free people. That's all life insurance is. In a place that cannot inflate the money supply. Life insurance companies cannot inflate the money supply. Now, we've got to understand, if you do this through free contract with other free people in a place that it cannot inflate, you can live and prosper in this hostile environment, and you could care less about what all this other stuff is going on out there. It's a peaceful, stress-free way of life. How do you get this thing across? Well, I wrote a book. Buy the book. Watch what happens. Don't try to sell this stuff. It's caught more than taught. Like Rosenberg points out so brilliantly that down deep, most folks know that something's wrong. To have the emotional strength, though, to overcome what is going on out there. They listen to the world. An example, very quickly. There was a radiologist at Coleman, Alabama, that was catching on to what I was teaching big time back when I was first putting all this together, back in my equitable life insurance connection days. But every time I went to him for a review, his first question, who else is doing this? I can't find anybody that will substantiate what you're teaching. Am I the Lone Ranger? Well, what if you are? You're doing it right, they're doing it wrong. You should rejoice. Well, he hung with it, and by the time he had retired, he had more than doubled his premium that he was paying at the time. But, you know, the hardest job that I had in working with him was that every time that I'd get together with him was to try to keep him between the ditches here to listen to the nonsense that goes on. And so, you know, we can get good advice from any number of sources. Let me tell you about that great philosopher, Johnny Mercer. Do y'all know who Johnny Mercer was? He was a songwriter. One of the songs that he wrote was, you got to accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, and don't mess with Mr. In Between. That is so profound. It is humanly impossible for you to think about two things at one time, even if they're both good things. Well, if one is good and one is bad, that accentuates the problem, okay? But the most insidious one there is the mystery in between. Here is the Earl Nightingale was someone I learned a great deal from, and he tells the story of Satan selling the tools of his trade. Satan had all these various tools that he had on auction out there to get rid of. There was a dagger of hate, the rapier of fear, and something of worry and so forth. But there was one tool he would never sell. It was the wedge of doubt. As long as he had the wedge of doubt, he could always be in business, because from that you will transition to the negative every cotton picking time. So beware of that sort of thing out there, and listen to what Johnny Mercer had to say. It's worthwhile, and it's ridiculously simple. The entire concept of infinite banking is ridiculously simple. But once you indulge in it big time through this medium called dividend-paying whole life insurance, it's peaceful. It is stress-free. As a result of this, within Mary and I and Dave and Kim's family, we haven't seen a bank in over 30 years. That is peaceful. That is stress-free. Now, checking accounts is not banking. Banking has to do with loans, and banks lend money that doesn't exist, and that is evil. And as Carlos Lara said, I think I reminded you, I said it before, if you have a loan at a bank of any kind, you are part of the problem. You are giving them credibility they do not deserve. Back in my North Carolina days, I was president of the Chamber of Commerce in this little town, Smithfield, and these are my forestry days. And so I got to pick the speaker for the annual meeting. Well, being an aviator, I picked Bill Piper Aircraft, and he was about 76 at that time, and it was fun to get to just sit and talk with a guy like that one-on-one. But one message that he gave to our group, I think, was very profound. He says, "You have a telephone, big deal. If somebody else doesn't have a telephone, you don't have a thing." Now, you may have the most profound message out there. You may have the ability to explain it to perfection, and you can have the best communication system. But if you don't have an inquiring listener, you don't have a thing. Face it. So it's just like Paul Rosenberg says, you got to be patient with these people. But once you do, when they catch on, there's no better joy than that. Thank you for being you.